Well, guys, doesn't feel like that long ago that we're here doing this for the April. We're back.
We are.
May 2023.
Just that adage of where's the year going? Just say that every year, but it just astounds me that we're in May.
I've got a view on this. As a percentage, when I was 10 years old, a year is like another 10% of my life, thereabouts. Now that I'm mid-40s.
How old exactly?
Mid-40s.
Was it 2 haircuts?
An extra year is only like, a couple of percent. So this is why it feels like it goes so much faster when you're older.
I'm still trying to work out the logic. The logic.
Oh, come on. All right, let's get into it, shall we? We'll talk about markets. Okay, believe that. So financial markets over the course of the last month or so. GDP growth, these numbers actually haven't been updated post last month. But, as we did talk about last time, we're in a pretty good position from a GDP growth perspective when we look at the longer term.
Yeah, indeed. And maybe it's given there hasn't been a change in this stat, maybe it's a chance to talk a little bit to the budget and the forecast for GDP growth in the budget that was delivered last night. And effectively for the 23-24 financial year, the forecast GDP number is 1.5. So it shows that we've still got a little bit to, on their estimates, of course, here I know the blue line's pointing towards the global GDP number, but here in Australia, we're looking at a slowdown and continued contraction, but not necessarily getting to that recessionary number.
Yeah, touch wood. I guess this is what everyone's kind of holding their breath on, really, isn't it? It's like how rapid or quick, whatever the word is you want to use, are we coming down? And I think generally the expectation is, GDP will be reducing. To your point, Shane, about governments expecting it to come down, and I think markets are too. It's just a matter of how fast and over what period.
Next slide, CPI inflation numbers, guys.
Yeah, I guess this is, as we continually discuss both in these economic updates and with our clients, inflation still is the single biggest driver of discussion live investment markets, and we're seeing inflation come down. Sticky inflation, as they sort of refer to it, has been stickier than perhaps we would have liked to have seen. But interesting again, sort of reflecting on some of the comments Jim Chalmers made quite confidently last night, actually, in his speech, was that we've seen the peak of inflation. So that was, and these charts speak to it a little bit, but I had the idea of the poison chalice just being kind of just going, whoop, there it goes.
Planting my flag, being like, this is the peak, it's finished.
There's the moment in time which went, oops, we shouldn't say that. But I think observationally, inflation is trending down, and
that's right.
Obviously we had a rate rise in May. Obviously we had pausing in April, and we've had another interest rate rise here in May, which again speaks to the fact that this problem hasn't gone away just yet. It's still there, and it's going to be still here for a little while to come.
This is inflation around the world. So we've got April 23 data and May 23 data. Chris, do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, right. So, obviously you can see the steep incline that we've all experienced over the course of the last couple of years in that inflation number, and obviously we're coming, many people would look at that and say inflation's peaked around the world, and then obviously kind of starting to decline. We're really looking for, I guess we're hoping, if you forward project off those numbers, you're kind of looking maybe for that to start to flatten out slightly. I think if we continue to see that number fall precipitously, there'll be some concern, I think, through financial markets, and I guess that's not probably what we want, not just for us internally here, but for investors broadly, because that is essentially going to mean more volatility, and we've had significant levels of volatility over the course of the last 3 years, and I know the conversations I'm having with clients is there's a fair bit of fatigue on the volatility front out there at the moment.
Yeah. It's just how it's going to be for the time being, isn't it? Again, wages and unemployment, wage price growth index back in April 23 last month versus this month you can just really see there's been more of a significant increase. So wage prices are still sort of starting to
Yep.
head up.
Yeah.
In the context of the government's budget last night, you know, worries about inflation.
And I think, you know, putting this slide and the previous slides together, I mean, the current sort of narrative is around services and inflation in services and wages continuing to trend up. It's kind of like we're seeing moderation in some areas of inflation, but those other parts like that are sticking a little bit harder are probably what's weighing on the monetary policy at this point.
Well, that's exactly what came out of the Reserve Bank meeting, is that they are concerned about this exactly. Like the comparative there is one of the reasons why they put rates up last month. So I suppose, again, you're crystal balling, but if you look at the top of that, it looks like maybe a little bit of an easement, sort of, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just hoping for what I want to see, but...
Well, that's what we want to see,
Yeah.
so we look for that. We
Yeah,
glass half
exactly.
full, really.
You could also sit there
It's
and
starting
argue
to
that
trend
that's
right.
going
That's right. Exactly. New chart this time. So this is, I just thought it'd be worth highlighting how steeply the cash rate has gone up in Australia. So this is our, well, and also how low it was in COVID. So, you know, it was almost zero, and now we're mid threes, heading higher potentially, and also globally as well. I mean, look at the US.
Yeah, it's crazy,
And
isn't
they're
it?
so far ahead relative to Australia as compared to where we are. It's, they've moved really significantly. So it's no wonder that we're seeing such halts in the economy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think and I know we talk about this a bit, but it probably is again important to kind of highlight the difference between Australian cash rate and say the US cash rate and the impact that it has. Australia is so sensitive to interest rate movements, far more sensitive than the US, because our home loans are variable and pegged to the cash rate, whereas the US home loan rates aren't necessarily pegged to the official cash rate of the day. They're more pegged to the 10-year bond rate based on the rate in which they take out at the time they take out their mortgage. So we don't see it as much in the sort of housing market. Whereas here in Australia, that's kind of all the buzzword, because Australians got such a love affair with real estate. You know, and that's why I think we can see less movements in Australian interest rates, but have potentially as a bigger impact as the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And then this just speaks to the average housing interest rates as well. So same context, except higher numbers essentially, add an extra margin onto the banks. But, you know, getting up back towards 6, which is, you know, where it's been for a while. The other thing that I found interesting in this chart was fixed rate loans. So these were the new loans that have been sort of created versus the outstanding loans, and the interest rates on the right-hand side as to what they're currently paying. So you can see it's really, I was reading an article about this last night, it really is over the course of the next 6 months that all of those fixed rate home loans are going from 2 to 5.5, 6, right?
And I read a fascinating article about this as well a couple of weeks ago in the Financial Review about competition, because as borrowers, people have got the ability to, you know, shop their home loan around, for example, on rates and try and get a better deal. But the stats are now showing that people who have got a home loan today at a certain level, if they had applied for that same home loan, say, even a year ago, they wouldn't be granted the same degree of finance today. So as a result, their ability to refinance another bank is gone, because they can't meet the credit criteria of the other bank. So it actually puts people into a bit of a corner where they're not able to kind of, you know, move around, whereas those who've got the capacity to move around are actually benefiting quite enormously now, because there are quite a lot of competitive differences between banks today. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, this sort of movement that we've seen over the last 12 months for some people, which is, you know, a bit of a worrying.
Definitely.
I'm worrying for those households too that can't use competition as their friend to get themselves a better deal.
Refinance,
Consumer sentiment, which we spent a bit of time on last month. And, you know, the numbers haven't been updated yet, so they're still low, essentially. People aren't feeling great.
Well, it speaks to that, right? Where,
Yeah.
You know, if you're in that position and you can't move your home loan, and you're looking at coming off fixed rates, which a lot of people are.
Yeah.
What are your options? You don't have any.
Yeah.
No wonder you're looking forward going, whoa,
The rate's going to come back down.
I'm not so sure. I'm not going to take that holiday, or I'm going to cut the X out of the shopping basket, or really looking for your insurance providers, that sort of thing, to see if you can get a better deal. I think there's a fair bit of that happening at the minute, so it's no wonder that I think those numbers are where they are.
Yeah, and in comparison, the NAB Business Survey, which is a survey on business conditions and business sentiment and confidence, doesn't look as dire as how consumers are feeling, which I find interesting, right? Because to your comment before about services inflation, it's just not as dire as consumers are feeling.
And those GDP numbers we saw before speak a bit to that, even though
Yeah,
they're
that's
moderating,
true.
they're still pretty healthy numbers on long-term average.
Yeah, that's right. This chart, same as last month. House prices are falling, as we know, and that's impacting net worth. The amount of debt that's been taken on is more expensive to service, as we've just talked about, and so subsequently, there's not as much debt being taken. Housing loan commitments are falling. And then that then speaks to house prices. So again, this data hasn't been updated from last month, but the reality is we have seen house price falls for those people that are probably have to sell into that market, right? But a restriction of supply.
Yeah. Yep. And interestingly, we're seeing a significant increase now for the first time in a while of immigration, which will potentially start to shift this around a little bit too, right?
Yeah, it was interesting because there's like some of the discussions out of the budget last night around creating more rental, capacity in that, so that people have got somewhere to live if they're not homeowners. Because I think we're all aware of the challenges that everyone's having if you don't own a home in terms of getting into that. It's pretty difficult at the minute. So there's a whole lot of dynamics there, isn't it? Feels going on. There's some. There's a lot in play in terms of uncertainty. I think no one's really got any too hard a grasp on what the short-term outcomes are likely to be.
So just on that, we've got a chart here which almost just talks through, specifically for the US economy, a range of different options that are almost possible. So 3 options, if we distill it down to that. A smooth rebalancing, so option 1. Continued volatility, which is almost the environment that we've been in, and that continues. And then the risks of a major recession. Each of them has, this clearly requires a prediction of the future, which we can't do, but each of them is possible. And I suppose a smooth rebalancing is perhaps what we're all hoping for, isn't it? So what does that look like in terms of what is that?
Yeah, well, it probably speaks a little bit to, as the slides suggest up there, around everything that's been forecast coming into fruition. So inflation moderating at the right rate. Yeah. The market, kind of settling down. Economic outlook kind of being a little bit healthier. And sort of the interest rates having an impact, but being sufficiently kind of restrictive, but not debilitating. Yep. And that's seemingly the best case scenario, that we've had this massive imbalance in regards to inflation and government spending, and the reversal of that in a controlled way is the best case scenario, and that's kind of what our central banks continue to tell us, and our governments for that matter.
That's right.
That we've got this under control and it's all going perfectly okay, and yes, this is part of the plan going forward, and that's what a smooth rebalancing looks like. But option 2 around macro volatility, not necessarily the same, Chris.
No, not at all. And I think in the smooth rebalancing scenario, it feels like that's what the market is kind of expecting at the moment in terms of what we're reading and hearing. I'm not hearing anything that's kind of too divergent from that, but I guess there's some, as we talked about with the inflation numbers earlier, around if you look at that macro volatility scenario, where if inflation is stickier, and let's say it takes, I don't know, I'm just plucking a number, instead of it being 12 or 18 months that we have a reduction in inflation, maybe it's 3 years because it holds on a little bit longer. That difference in itself is going to create some volatility, because it's different to, I suppose, what the market's currently pricing in or expecting at the moment. So, you know, any variation from that scenario, Shane, that you've explained, I think we'll see market movement.
Yeah, lots of volatility up and down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that's right. And I think it's been a period of uncertainty, and that's likely to continue. And the volatility that we see in financial markets as a result of that is just, unfortunately, I wish it wasn't this way, part of being an investor.
Yep. Exactly.
Is it reasonable to say, gents, that we probably sort of sit in the kind of the middle to the left part of that chart there, macro volatility towards rebalancing?
Yep.
You know, that seems like it's the more plausible.
I think so.
You know, like the perfect world or the utopic view of a smooth rebalancing that we've been told will happen.
Mm.
We've seen already in the last 3 or 4 months inflation numbers being different to expectations.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's hard to imagine that exactly what's been forecast comes to fruition as proposed. So I think that macro volatility we talk about is certainly probably
absolutely
the new norm for a little while.
Yep. Oh, well, it's interesting because to your point, Shane, if you go back to say January, all the speak was by the end of 2023 we'll be back. We'll be back down to where we were, and everyone was just expecting it to top off nicely and finish up. And now we're in the middle of April, and we're still like kind of up there. So it's about what's the reaction, I suppose, and how severe is the differential from expectation.
So into performance numbers. So again, we do this every month.
Yep.
So bond markets, particularly Australian bonds, have been okay looking from a 1 year perspective. A couple of percent, 2.7%. Global has been down because of that volatility.
Mm-hmm.
The 6 month numbers are interesting. So we've seen 6 month numbers do 3 and 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
So has been a recovery in bonds, and that's because yields have almost settled down a little bit.
Yep.
So yields have fallen, bond values have risen a little bit, which is a better state of affairs, I guess we'd say, because that's what we're expecting out of our defensive part of the portfolio, which is where bonds sit, right?
Interesting. I'm just saying, looking at that, you can see that we're tracking sideways from about March.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
we're in a holding pattern, waiting to see what's the trend.
Yeah, spot on, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is speaking exactly to that point about that smooth rebalancing or macro volatility.
Yep.
The fact that that chart there talks to a bit of that sideways movement is that it doesn't know either really.
Yep.
Equity markets, performance the last 12 months. Europe's up 19. The US market last 12 months is up 3, and this Aussie market's essentially still. Hasn't been still during that ride. It's been like this.
Yeah.
But hasn't moved really in 12 months.
European one's a little misleading because you've got the Russian invasion of
That's
Ukraine
right.
in the part of the
That's
chart.
right,
That's
that's
just,
Yeah, that's right. This is all about time frames, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. You don't see the fall.
Yeah, that was February last year. Wasn't
Yes.
It? Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, the 6 months numbers too. So 4, 10 and 14. And that probably speaks to your point, particularly around Australian equities. The market's just, it's doing okay, it's waiting. Let's just see how this plays out.
Yeah.
All short-term stuff, right? And then, which is why we always like to finish on this chart, which is market timing. So, and
It's all right.
Go ahead.
I was just going to make a joke. I was looking at that and going, "Oh, look at that! We're just at the beginning. Load up."
oh, Chris, quickly go to the next slide. We said none of this is advice. So long-term timeframes end up with a larger upswing than a downswing. So.
But look, maybe I can just add to that now as well, is that we always run the risk of sounding like a broken record on this very slide, but it's so important, right? It really is, and asset allocation today I think matters more than any period for the last 15 years post GFC, because we had a very fortunate era there where just about anything you owned went up in value.
Yep.
Today we don't have that same fortune, and we've got uncertainty all around us. So not jumping in and out of things is seemingly the only solution right at this point in time. So I think it is a great chart for people to kind of look at and reflect on, and hold that confidence that long term and a sound asset allocation does hold us in good stead.
Yeah. it just cuts through all the noise.
It does, which is why we like to use it.
As everybody knows, and you probably heard us say it all the time in terms of we're evidence based. It's like it's very hard to argue with the evidence. And every time I look at this, I'm just like, why would you try and go against?
That's right.
it.
Yeah.
It's just it seems like madness.
All right, the disclaimer. That was all general advice. And if you're going to do something off the back of that, don't. No, go and get personal advice. It's obviously incredibly important. Yeah. All right, that wraps us up, guys. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. It's nearly home time now. Got
Yeah.
trains to catch. All right, thanks everyone.
Ciao.
See you soon.